Happy holidays, everybody, and Tony here with my tribute to the Fat Albert Christmas special from Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids, which aired on CBS on December 18, 1977. This was directed by Hal Sutherland, and it was written by Bill Danch and Jim Ryan. Before all the sexual assault allegations and before all the contentious controversy that Bill Cosby found himself in that otherwise compromised his career as an entertainer, he was once upon a time hailed as America's dad. And he was that for a reason. He was an advocate for education. He was fully aware of his young audience, whether they be children, teenagers, or young adults. And he always made sure that the lessons that he taught them did not talk down to them, but actually spoke to them in a genuine manner. This was reflected in his programming, from his educational videos to Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids to The Cosby Show, all the way up to Kids Say the Darndest Things and Little Bill. Mr. Cosby always made sure that he did not talk down to his viewers, and he was fully aware of what they need to do in life, as well as the direction they needed to choose, let alone make in their lives, so that they can grow up to be the best people they can be. And Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids was certainly one animated show that put him on the map as somebody who was fully aware of his young audience and audiences who were also young at heart. This show was not afraid to tackle such really serious issues, but also do so in a way that managed to balance humor with drama, some amount of action, and some lighthearted moments. Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids was not only revolutionary for Black audiences, but also for audiences no matter what race, creed, or belief they had. The show managed to tackle issues of class, race, violence, substance abuse, divorce, drugs, and many other challenging topics that would otherwise be difficult to talk about without having to make sure that they don't do so in a shocking manner or in a manner that talked down to them. Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids was definitely a show that continues to resonate with me, and it does so in a way that made me feel proud to call myself a fan of this wonderful animated show. I first knew about Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids when I was a very young kid, and at first I just heard about it in passing. It wasn't until I was a 13-year-old seventh grader that I caught it on Cartoon Network Asia that I managed to be thoroughly immersed in the world that Fat Albert and all his 7 friends got themselves into. And I still love this show to this very day. I find myself watching reruns of it on YouTube, and I managed to continue to enjoy it and even continue to be invested in it, all because it managed to take me seriously as a viewer. And what more can I expect from something as awesome and absolutely brilliant as Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids? It was a well-balanced show that managed to balance humor with drama, fun moments with serious moments, and lots of lessons I could learn along the way. Whether I learn about how to take better care of myself and my health, or the issues that are still going on in this world, Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids definitely helped me, especially during the times I was growing up as a young teenager. And to this day, Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids managed to hold up so extremely well. And the Christmas special was also a microcosm of what I enjoyed the most about Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids. Not only did this deal with race and class without shoving it into its viewers, but it did so in a way that had a lot of heart, mind, and soul into it, and it brought a smile on my face and also some tears to my eyes in some of the sadder moments. And it's one of those Christmas specials that made me further respect the legacy that Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids left for every single viewer who caught this show. It's Christmas Eve and it is snowing. Fat Albert, Mushmouth, Bill, Dumb Donald, Bucky, Russell, Weird Harold, and Rudy are about to prepare for their upcoming nativity program to celebrate what Christmas is about, which is the birth of Jesus Christ. However, the preparations end up being interrupted by the proprietor, Mr. Tyrone, who wants to evict Fat Albert and his friends from their clubhouse and therefore demolishing it. Fat Albert and his friends plead with Mr. Tyrone to not destroy the clubhouse, but Mr. Tyrone has already made up his mind in terms of what plans he has for it. Now, what's so interesting about Mr. Tyrone is that he is essentially the Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids version of Ebenezer Scrooge. Just looking at his attire and the way he presents himself, as well as how his scowls and his manner just radiate with that typical negativity that Ebenezer Scrooge initially had in A Christmas Carol, all scream that he was this version of Scrooge who just does not like the holidays and cannot stand the overall rambunctiousness that the youth have to offer. What's even more difficult for Fat Albert and his friends is that there is a young boy by the name of Marshall who also ends up being stuck in the snow, not being helped by the fact that his father was made redundant and that his mother is falling into labor, i.e., she was pregnant. Even worse was that their car broke down. So they end up staying for the night in Fat Albert's and his friend's clubhouse. But as Marshall's mother, Margie, is about to fall into labor and the baby is about to come out soon, time is running out. So Fat Albert makes a desperate plea to Mr. Tyrone to not destroy the clubhouse. It also doesn't help that Mr. Tyrone is about to close down his own shop and acquire as much money as possible for a closing sale, but he's not also having any of the generousness he wants to share, especially with a street Santa who admonishes him for his greed. He ends up hatching a plan for Fat Albert to dress up as Santa and invite all his potential customers to purchase whatever is left from his store. Time continues to run out for Margie, even as Bill and her husband, Ray, go to a hospital, but they are not so lucky because Ray, due to him being made redundant, doesn't have insurance and he could not afford it. And as to be expected, Margie is still feeling the pain of her pregnancy to the point where she ends up lying down. This leads Bill and Russell to try to find Fat Albert and consult him in terms of which doctor delivered him when he was a baby. However, Rudy, Mushmouth, Dumb Donald, Bucky, and Weird Harold beat him to the punch and initially think that Fat Albert was selling them out by being the shop Santa. But Fat Albert had to take up this proposition in order to save the clubhouse, as Mr. Tyrone misinterprets what is going on between Fat Albert and his friends. He ends up firing Fat Albert and shooing away all his friends until Mr. Tyrone is confronted by none other than Mudfoot Brown. Now, this scene is my personal favorite highlight because this makes Mudfoot Brown put Mr. Tyrone in his place, and he calls him out on his greed, he calls him out on his bitterness, and he calls him out on his horrible attitude. And the short time that Fat Albert worked with Mr. Tyrone, he was able to understand why he was the way he was. And that was because Mr. Tyrone lost his wife, Martha, and he ended up being an embittered widower. Sure, the problem I had with that moment was that it could have been shown and not just told, but I totally digress. But even if you cut out that whole dead wife backstory, nothing would change, and it would also just be the tale of Mr. Tyrone just being absolutely jaded about the holidays, as well as realizing that the holidays just seems like it's just nothing more than manufactured commercialism and overconsumption disguised as something that's supposed to be a festive cheer. Maybe that could have made him this bitter, jaded, and angry old man instead of involving his dead wife, Martha. But at the end of the day, I digress. At least the loss of Mr. Tyrone's wife, Martha, was sort of a reason why he ended up encasing himself in a lot of bitterness and anger, even to the point where Mudfoot Brown ends up reprimanding him and admonishing him for his awful greedy ways and gives him some home truths, with one of them being that the best thing Mr. Tyrone can do is to do one good deed to others, which he highly doubts that he'll ever do. Meanwhile, Marshall, who was initially with Fat Albert's friends, ends up walking alone through the city until he meets a stray dog. Now, this is a nice little moment between Marshall and the stray dog because it shows that you don't really need that much dialogue in terms of making the characters interact and in terms of making them understand each other, and how they were able to form a friendship was absolutely heartwarming in its own special way. However, that heartwarming moment is about to come to a halt as Marshall ends up overhearing his parents and the problems they would end up having, and his father completely blaming himself for losing his job and for losing whatever financial wealth they could have had. But Margie reassures him that it's not his fault. But Marshall ends up misinterpreting this and ends up running away. Fat Albert and 5 out of his 7 friends make it back to the clubhouse to check on Ray and Margie, but are shocked to know that Marshall was missing. This leads them to go out on a wild goose chase for Marshall. All the while, Rudy and Dumb Donald are about to fetch Fat Albert's doctor to make it to the Franklin couple. It's a mad dash for Marshall to try to escape from Fat Albert, Mushmouth, Bucky, Russell, Weird Harold, and Bill, until Marshall ends up falling down and cries for their help. This then leads Harold to grab Marshall's hand, and eventually Fat Albert to grab Harold's ankles, and the rest of his friends to keep on holding on to each other until Marshall ends up being pulled back up, safe and sound, but still feeling very sad that he thought his parents did not want him anymore. But Fat Albert has some few words of wisdom to Marshall, that his parents would be even poorer if Marshall did not end up existing in their lives, and if ever Marshall ended up running away. Although Marshall initially took that to heart, he ends up missing again. And just in the nick of time, Fat Albert's doctor, as well as Rudy and Dumb Donald, were able to deliver the baby safe and sound, much to the relief and joy of Fat Albert, Mushmouth, Bucky, Weird Harold, Russell, and Bill. And entering the clubhouse is Mr. Tyrone, who ends up having a change of heart, accompanied by none other than Marshall. And all is happy once again, especially when Marshall ends up greeting his new baby sibling. And it's all smiles and joys when everybody exchanges gifts and even gives gifts to Marshall's baby sibling. This also makes Mr. Tyrone realize that Fat Albert's and his friends' clubhouse is an important place because this was the place that the Franklins managed to keep their family safe and sound, especially since Margie was able to have a safe delivery through Fat Albert's doctor, And this was where everybody got together in harmony and in the good Christmas spirit. Therefore, Mr. Tyrone found it in his heart to not take down, let alone demolish, the clubhouse. And as a sign of gratitude, Russell even gives him his golden compass, which, as Fat Albert exposits, was one of his most prized possessions. This leads Fat Albert, his friends, and the Franklins to greet him a Merry Christmas, and best of all, Mr. Tyrone even ends up giving Marshall a baseball. And this managed to also end in such a poignant manner, as Mr. Tyrone ends up looking up to the sky and asks for his wife Martha's approval of whether he's done a good job, which managed to bring a tear to my eye. And even more powerful is just how the episode ended with a shining star, which is also the same shining star that led the three wise men to Bethlehem to experience the birth of Jesus Christ. And I also thought that this was a beautiful way to end the episode. But mind you, this was not the only piece of religious symbolism that was evident, as we also had one earlier with Margie and the expecting baby, as well as Marshall, as well as three of Fat Albert's friends dressed as the three wise men, to also show that this is the gift of the Magi. So that was also a surprisingly beautiful piece of religious imagery right there that wasn't hammered in, but was done so in such a deep and beautiful way. And that's how I felt about the Fat Albert Christmas special. And it was such a beautifully crafted and amazing Christmas episode that managed to bring tears to my eyes, a smile to my face, laughter in my heart, and just made me feel for all the characters. Yes, the only issue was that it ran for a very short time, being about 23 to 25 minutes. But from what I managed to acquire from these 23 to 25 minutes, I was still very grateful, and I still felt very happy with what I managed to watch. And as I stated before, the biggest highlight for me was Mr. Tyrone being confronted by Mudfoot Brown. He didn't need to be confronted by three ghosts, specifically the ghost of Christmas past, the ghost of Christmas present, and the ghost of Christmas future. All it took was Mudfoot Brown's home truths to be delivered by him to Mr. Tyrone to make him realize the errors of his own ways and therefore challenge him to be a better person. And I really have to applaud Bill Cosby for not only bringing Fat Albert, Mushmouth, and Bill to life, but also emit such strong words of wisdom, as well as some really strong home truths from Mudfoot Brown, because he was definitely the underrated star of this particular episode, as well as the unsung hero. So I really have to give it to the Fat Albert Christmas special for being such a beautiful and for being such a timeless Christmas episode that I would love to keep watching over and over again throughout the holidays. And for those of you who caught the Fat Albert Christmas special, what'd you think of it? Did you really love it to the point where you felt that you could cry tears of joy and have a big smile in your heart? Was there a moment you really loved to the point where you would love to watch it over and over again? Or did this Christmas special not appeal to you? Comment below and let me know. Well, that's it for my tribute to the Fat Albert Christmas special from Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids. Tune in much later for my tribute to Father's Day from The Cosby Show. So until then, happy holidays, everybody!